The inferno and the hero. The inferno roared around me, a living, hungry beast with 1,000 fiery tongues. Smoke, thick and acrid, clawed at my throat, each breath a searing torture. I stumbled, disoriented, the layout of my own apartment building warped into a terrifying labyrinth by the encroaching darkness. Plaster dust mingled with ash, coating everything in a fine, choking layer. The heat was immense, a physical presence pressing in, baking my skin, making my eyes water and sting. I could hear the desperate screams of others, a symphony of terror that only amplified my own rising panic. The floorboards beneath me groaned and crackled, threatening to give way at any moment, and the air shimmered with the intense thermal currents. I pressed a trembling hand to the wall, hoping to guide myself, but the paint blistered and peeled under my touch, the heat radiating through the plaster. This wasn't just a fire. It was an all-consuming entity, devouring everything in its path. My head throbbed, a dull, insistent ache behind my eyes. I squinted, trying to discern any shape, any sliver of light, but the gloom was absolute, pierced only by the angry orange glow of the nearest flames. My lungs burned, demanding air that wasn't poisoned. This was it, I thought, a desperate, hollow understanding settling in. I was trapped. The thought brought with it a wave of despair so profound it almost buckled my knees. I slid down, my back scraping against the blistering wall, gasping for air that simply wasn't there. This was how it ended, not in some grand adventure, but suffocating in the dark, surrounded by the merciless roar of the fire. Just as the last vestiges of hope flickered and threatened to die, a shape materialized through the swirling smoke. Tall, imposing, a silhouette against the inferno's glow. For a terrifying second, I thought it was another hallucination, a cruel trick of my oxygen-starved brain. But then a gloved hand was reaching for me, strong and unyielding. A muffled voice, deep and resonant even through the respirator, cut through the din. "Hey, you okay? We need to go." Before I could even register a coherent thought, the hand was gripping my arm, hauling me to my feet with a surprising ease that belied my own weight. The world spun. I coughed, a dry, racking sound, and found myself half carried, half dragged through the smoke. The firefighter moved with an incredible speed and certainty, navigating the treacherous debris-strewn path as if it were a brightly lit street. He was a force, an unstoppable momentum pulling me from the jaws of the beast. My feet stumbled, but his grip never faltered. He was yelling something, urging me on, but the words were lost in the roar of the fire and the frantic beating of my own heart. All I knew was the relentless pull, the sheer, undeniable strength of the person guiding me. The transition from the suffocating heat to the cool night air was jarring, almost painful in its suddenness. One moment I was choking on smoke, the next I was on solid ground, lying on a patch of damp grass. I coughed deep, ragged coughs that racked my entire body, trying to expel the toxins from my lungs. Above me, the sky was a deep, inky black, dotted with a few brave stars, a stark contrast to the angry orange glow that still consumed my building. Flashing lights painted the scene in frantic red and blue hues. A figure knelt beside me, the same figure that had pulled me from the flames. He was breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling beneath the heavy turnout gear. Then, with a deliberate motion, he reached up and unlatched his helmet. He lifted it off, and for the first time, I saw his face. Sweat plastered dark strands of hair to his forehead, and his cheeks were smudged with soot. But his eyes were startlingly clear, a piercing blue against the grime. They held a profound, almost unsettling kindness, even as they scanned my face, assessing me with a quiet intensity. He looked tired, yes, but there was a calm assurance in his gaze, a steady strength that resonated deep within me. He was breathing a little easier now, his respirator hanging loose from his neck. "You're safe," he said, his voice a low rumble, devoid of the earlier urgency, though still a little hoarse. "Just breathe. Slowly." I stared at him, unable to form words, only managing a weak nod. My chest still burned, my head still throbbed, but looking into those blue eyes, a strange sense of peace began to settle over me. In the chaos, in the frantic blur of emergency personnel and flashing lights, his face, his eyes, were a singular point of focus. He was real. He had saved me, and as he offered me a small, tired smile, something shifted within me, a quiet, unexpected recognition in the midst of the terror. His name, I would learn later, was Caleb. But in that moment, he was simply the hero, his gaze leaving an indelible mark on my smoke-addled mind. He was the one who had pulled me from the inferno, and his presence, even then, felt like a promise. A visit and a plant. The doorbell chimed, a bright, intrusive sound that cut through the quiet hum of the apartment. Leo, still a little stiff, shuffled to the door, his movements measured. He peered through the peephole, expecting a delivery or perhaps a neighbor. Instead, a broad-shouldered silhouette filled the frame, a familiar, albeit surprising, figure. He opened the door slowly. Caleb stood on his doormat, looking slightly out of place in a faded denim jacket, a stark contrast to the crisp uniform Leo had seen him in before. In his hands, he held a small terracotta pot, from which a vibrant green fern unfurled delicate fronds. Its unexpected presence in Caleb's large hands was almost comical. "Hey," Caleb said, a hint of awkwardness in his voice, his gaze flickering from Leo's face to the plant. "Just checking in." "How are you doing?" Leo blinked, taken aback. "Caleb, I'm fine, mostly. Just a bit sore." He gestured vaguely to his chest, where a faint bruise was starting to bloom beneath his shirt. "Come in." Caleb stepped inside, bringing with him the faint scent of wood smoke that seemed to cling to him, a ghost of the night before. He held out the plant. "Thought you might need some green, something to look at that isn't charred." Leo took the pot, his fingers brushing against Caleb's. The ceramic was cool against his palm, the leaves velvety soft. "It's lovely, thank you." He didn't know what else to say. The gesture was so profoundly unexpected, so thoughtful, it disarmed him. "No problem," Caleb said, shrugging, his eyes scanning the living room. It was tidy, sparsely decorated but comfortable. A stack of books sat on the coffee table, a half-finished mug of tea beside them. "Looks like you got everything back in order." "Mostly. The landlord's been good about the repairs," Leo replied, setting the fern on a windowsill where sunlight streamed in, illuminating its verdant leaves. He turned back to Caleb, feeling a blush creep up his neck. "Honestly, I didn't expect you to visit." Caleb ran a hand through his dark hair. "Just wanted to make sure you were okay, see if you needed anything." His voice was deeper now, less formal than it had been during the rescue. "It was a close call." Leo nodded, the memory of the smoke, the heat, the overwhelming fear still sharp. "It was. You really saved me. I don't know how to thank you." "Just doing my job," Caleb said, though his gaze lingered on Leo for a moment longer than strictly necessary. "You looked pretty shaken up." "I was," Leo admitted, a small involuntary shiver running down his spine. "Still am, a bit. Every time I smell something burning, I jump." He managed a weak smile, but seeing a friendly face helps. A silence settled between them, comfortable rather than strained. Leo found himself studying Caleb more closely now, in the calm light of day. His eyes were a deep, intelligent brown, crinkling at the corners. When he offered a small, almost shy smile, there was a strength in his posture, but also a quiet watchfulness. "So," Caleb finally broke the quiet, "you're really all right? No lasting injuries?" "Just a few aches and pains. The doctor said I was lucky." Leo hugged himself, a small gesture of self-comfort. "And you?" You seemed, pretty exhausted last night. Caleb chuckled, a low rumble. Comes with the territory. We had a few other calls after yours. Long night. He shifted his weight, glancing at the fern again. Make sure you water that. They like damp soil. I will, Leo promised, a genuine warmth spreading through him. He often felt invisible, especially in crowds, but Caleb had seen him, had saved him, and now here he was, bringing him a plant and checking on his well-being. It was an unfamiliar, yet welcome sensation. All right then, Caleb said, pushing off the doorframe. I should probably get going. Got a shift soon. Oh, right. Leo felt a flicker of disappointment he hadn't anticipated. Thank you again, Caleb, for everything. Caleb nodded, a brief, almost imperceptible dip of his head. He met Leo's gaze squarely, a silent understanding passing between them. Take care, Leo. And then he was gone, the door closing with a soft click, leaving Leo alone in the quiet apartment once more. But the silence felt different now. The small fern on the windowsill, its leaves vibrant and green, was a testament to the unexpected visit, a quiet reminder that someone had cared enough to check in, to bring a small piece of life into his world. A strange, fragile hope blossomed in Leo's chest, as delicate and green as the plant. Lemonade on the porch. The first few visits were quick, almost clinical. Caleb would knock, usually just as Leo was settling into a book or attempting to coax some life back into his neglected houseplants. He'd stand on the threshold, a tall, solid presence, asking about the soreness, the sleep, the lingering cough. Leo, still a little stiff, would offer curt answers, convinced Caleb was merely fulfilling some unwritten first responder's obligation. Then a quick nod, a mumbled, "Glad you're doing well," and he'd be gone, leaving behind the faint scent of something earthy and clean. But then, the quick check-ins started to stretch. One Tuesday, Caleb didn't just ask about the cough. He mentioned seeing a new barista at the coffee shop down the street who made surprisingly good cappuccinos. Leo, caught off guard, found himself describing his own failed attempts at latte art. The next time, Caleb arrived with a small bag of groceries, a carton of fresh eggs, and a loaf of artisanal sourdough. Thought you might be tired of toast, he'd mumbled, his ears faintly red. Leo remembered the look on his face, a mixture of concern and something that almost bordered on shyness. Soon, the visits settled into a rhythm. Caleb would show up, usually in the late afternoon, just as the sun began to slant golden through the porch columns. He'd arrive with a six-pack of craft lemonade, always the same brand, sparkling with a hint of ginger. Leo would fetch 2 glasses, and they'd settle onto the old swing, the chains groaning a familiar tune. One sweltering afternoon, the humidity clinging to everything like a damp blanket, Caleb was recounting a particularly chaotic shift involving a cat stuck in a tree and a surprisingly aggressive squirrel. Leo, nursing his lemonade, found himself laughing harder than he had in months. The sound felt unfamiliar, yet freeing. Caleb paused, a faint smile playing on his lips, watching Leo with an intensity that made something flutter in his chest. You know, Caleb said, his voice a low rumble, I used to watch old black and white movies with my grandmother. She swore Cary Grant was the most charming man who ever lived. Leo's eyebrows lifted. Really? I'm more of a Bogart fan myself. Caleb chuckled, a warm, easy sound. Bogart's good, but Grant had that effortless suave. Plus, he never seemed to be sweating through his trench coat. He took a long sip of his lemonade. And for the record, I despise olives, absolutely can't stand them. The texture, the briny taste. Ugh. It was a small detail, utterly inconsequential, yet it felt monumental. Leo found himself storing it away, a tiny piece of Caleb's world tucked into his own. He offered up his own trivial dislikes: cilantro, reality TV, mornings before coffee. The conversations flowed like that, meandering through work stories, childhood memories, opinions on local restaurants, and the merits of various lawn care techniques. Leo started to anticipate the gentle knock. His heart, a muscle he hadn't paid much attention to in years, would give a distinct little flip whenever he heard the crunch of Caleb's boots on the gravel path. It was a strange sensation, this warmth unfurling in his chest, a subtle current of electricity whenever Caleb's gaze lingered a moment too long. He'd catch himself straightening his shirt, running a hand through his hair, a faint flush rising to his cheeks. He watched Caleb one afternoon, silhouetted against the setting sun, his profile strong and clear. The way his brow furrowed when he was concentrating, the slight crinkle at the corners of his eyes when he smiled, the steady rhythm of his breathing. It was all becoming intensely, beautifully familiar. He was no longer just the firefighter who'd pulled him from the smoke. He was Caleb, the man who liked old movies, hated olives, and brought lemonade to his porch. And Leo, to his own quiet astonishment, was starting to look forward to every single visit, every shared story, every moment on that creaking porch swing. A lightness he hadn't known he'd lost was slowly, steadily filling him. Candlelight and quiet moments. The lights flickered once, a nervous stutter in the steady hum of the evening, then plunged the house into absolute darkness. Leo, mid-sentence with a mug of cooling tea, set it down with a soft clink. A sigh escaped him, less of irritation and more of resignation. His phone screen illuminated his face with a pale blue glow as he checked the time. Still early. The silence that followed felt vast, punctuated only by the distant wail of a siren, an unrelated lament in the suddenly quiet neighborhood. A knock, hesitant at first, then more insistent, startled him. Who could it be? He navigated the unfamiliar dark of his own hallway, hand brushing against the cool plaster, until he reached the door. Through the peephole, a familiar silhouette stood against the faint moonlight, a bag slung over one shoulder. Caleb. Leo opened the door. Caleb, what are you? Power's out, Caleb stated, his voice a low rumble in the darkness. He held up a small brown paper bag. Brought supplies and a flashlight. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his presence immediately filling the space with a comforting weight. The beam of his flashlight cut through the gloom, dancing over the walls, illuminating dust motes in its path. From the bag, he produced 2 tall white pillar candles and a small box of matches. He placed them carefully on the coffee table, the flicker of the match a brief, startling burst of light before the wicks caught, casting a warm, dancing glow across the living room. Thanks, Leo managed, feeling a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the candles. You didn't have to. Caleb shrugged, his shoulders momentarily illuminated by the candlelight. Figured you might be caught off guard. I always keep a stash for these things. He settled onto the armchair, a familiar comfort now, the dim light softening the edges of his face. They talked. Hours bled into one another, marked only by the slow consumption of the candles. The lack of electricity seemed to strip away the day's usual pretenses, inviting a deeper kind of conversation. Caleb spoke of growing up near the coast, of the salty air and the relentless rhythm of the waves, a stark contrast to the landlocked city they now inhabited. He confessed a secret ambition to one day build his own boat, a small wooden vessel for fishing. Leo found himself sharing details of his own past he hadn't spoken of in years, a brief, ill-fated stint in a band during college, his love for obscure classical composers, the quiet satisfaction he found in restoring antique furniture. My dad taught me a bit about plumbing, Caleb said at one point, his gaze drifting towards the kitchen. Sounds like you've got a leaky faucet in there. Heard it when I came in. Leo, who had learned to tune out the persistent drip, 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 felt a flush of embarrassment. Oh, yeah, been meaning to get to that. Caleb rose, stretching. Mind if I take a look? Might be a quick fix. He disappeared into the kitchen, the flashlight beam preceding him. A few minutes later, the clinking of tools, a grunt of effort, and then silence. The rhythmic drip was gone. Caleb returned, wiping his hands on a rag he'd retrieved from somewhere. Just needed a new washer. Had one in my toolbox in the truck. The small act, the quiet competence, settled something deep within Leo. It wasn't just the fix, it was the easy assumption of care, the effortless way Caleb slipped into his life, noticing the small inconveniences and moving to alleviate them. As the second candle began to gutter, casting long, dancing shadows, Caleb rose to leave. Should be on my way. Power's probably back on by now, knowing my luck. Leo walked him to the door, the chill of the night air a sharp contrast to the intimate warmth they'd created inside. Thanks, Caleb, for everything. The candles, the conversation, the faucet. Caleb offered a shy smile, the kind that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Any time, Leo. Glad I could help. He was gone, leaving behind the faint scent of beeswax and a profound sense of quiet contentment in the air. The power did, in fact, flicker back on a moment later, flooding the house with bright, unceremonious light. But for Leo, the true light had been the soft glow of the candles and the steady, comforting presence of Caleb. The house felt lighter now, not just from the absence of the leaky drip, but from the quiet intimacy that had settled within its walls. He found himself looking forward to Caleb's next visit with a fluttering anticipation he hadn't felt in a very long time. Unspoken words and lingering touches. The refrigerator's usual drone, a barely registered backdrop, had ceased, leaving Leo's apartment steeped in an unaccustomed hush. He'd braced himself for another evening of sputtering candlelight and tepid tea, yet found an unexpected solace in the deepening gloom. A knock at the door, firm but not forceful, punctured the stillness. Caleb stood silhouetted against the hallway, a canvas satchel slung across his chest, a battery lantern casting a warm glow on his features. Figured you might be in the dark, he offered, a faint smile playing on his lips as he stepped inside. He unshouldered his bag, revealing a thermos, a handful of emergency candles, and a compact, battery-operated radio. And, he added, pulling out a multi-tool, I remembered you mentioning that leaky faucet the other day. A surprising wellspring of gratitude bubbled within Leo. Caleb, you honestly didn't have to. Nonsense. What are neighbors for? Caleb's eyes, typically a steady blue, seemed to hold a deeper warmth in the dim light. They met Leo's across the small living room, and for a beat, the air thickened. It wasn't an awkward silence, but a profound quiet, laden with an unspoken understanding. A blush crept up Leo's neck, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. He averted his gaze, busying himself with lighting one of Caleb's candles. Ever practical, Caleb moved towards the kitchen. The rhythmic drip of the faucet, a constant irritant, now felt almost trivial amidst the broader power outage. Yet, as Caleb worked, his broad shoulders illuminated by the lantern, the annoying cadence stopped. He emerged minutes later, wiping his hands on a rag, a glint of satisfaction in his gaze. Good as new. They talked for hours that night. Caleb, usually reserved, found himself recounting childhood fishing trips with his father and the quiet satisfaction of building things by hand. Leo, in turn, spoke of his own contemplative life, his passion for art, and the unexpected comfort he often found in solitude. The power outage, initially a nuisance, had become an unlikely conduit for connection. When it was finally time for Caleb to leave, a reluctant tension settled between them. He stood by the door, the canvas bag once more slung over his shoulder. Well, he said, his voice softer than before. "I should let you get some rest." Leo walked him to the door, a vague sense of disappointment already taking root. As Caleb turned to go, his warm, calloused hand rested for a moment on Leo's shoulder. It wasn't a casual gesture. It lingered, a feather-light pressure that sent a jolt through Leo. Then Caleb's fingers slid down to his arm, a gentle squeeze before he finally released him. Their eyes met again, a brief, intense exchange that spoke volumes without a single word. After Caleb had disappeared down the hallway, Leo leaned against the closed door, the warmth of Caleb's touch still radiating from his shoulder. He closed his eyes, a small smile gracing his lips. It was more than just gratitude. It was a feeling of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in a long while. The lingering touch, the shared stories, the quiet understanding in their gazes, it all wove into a nascent hope. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that something profound was shifting between them, something he yearned to explore. The darkness beyond his window no longer felt empty. It hummed with the promise of unspoken words and future connections. He found himself anticipating Caleb's next knock, the next lingering touch, the next strange quiet that held so much meaning. The empty space. The Tuesday after their last awkward, beautiful conversation came and went without a knock. Leo chalked it up to Caleb being busy, perhaps a particularly demanding shift at the station. He told himself not to overthink it, even as a tiny, unwelcome tendril of apprehension began to curl in his stomach. Wednesday, then Thursday, followed the same pattern of silence. The easy rhythm they'd established, the almost daily presence that had become as natural as breathing, had simply ceased. By Friday, the quiet felt less like a temporary pause and more like a vast, echoing chasm. Leo found himself staring at his phone, his thumb hovering over Caleb's contact. He practiced a casual text in his head, something light, innocuous. But every attempt felt forced, a desperate plea masquerading as indifference. He finally settled on a simple, "Hey, checking in. Everything okay?" The message sent, the silence that followed was deafening. No read receipt, no reply, just the stark, unyielding white of the messaging screen. Saturday passed in a blur of restless energy. He cleaned his apartment for the third time that week, reorganizing books he'd just organized, wiping down surfaces that were already spotless. His usual Saturday morning coffee on the balcony felt hollow without the anticipation of a potential visit. He tried calling Caleb that afternoon. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. Caleb's recorded voice, steady and calm, asking the caller to leave a message. Leo hung up without saying a word. He tried again a few hours later and then once more before bed. Each time, the same result. The unanswered calls were a dull throb behind his eyes, a relentless ache in his chest. The following week unfolded with a stark, brutal emptiness. The once familiar comfort of his solitude now felt like a cage. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant siren sent a jolt of hope through him, quickly followed by a crushing wave of disappointment. He found himself walking past Caleb's station just casually on his way to nowhere in particular, hoping for a glimpse, a chance encounter. The red brick building stood stoic and unyielding, offering no answers. He just vanished, Leo told Maya over lukewarm coffee at their usual spot. His voice was a flat monotone, devoid of its usual warmth. No explanation, no warning. Maya, ever practical, stirred her spoon slowly. "Maybe he just needs space, Leo. You two have been pretty intense lately." Liam, who was engrossed in his phone, finally looked up. "Yeah, man. Sometimes people get overwhelmed. Give him some room to breathe." Leo raked a hand through his hair. "But that's not like him. He wouldn't just disappear, not after everything." The words hung heavy in the air, the unspoken everything encompassing the shared silences, the lingering touches, the almost confessions that had danced between them. He felt a profound sense of loss, not just of Caleb's presence, but of the tentative future he'd started to build in his mind, brick by fragile brick. Maybe he just needs to sort things out, Maya offered gently, sensing the depth of Leo's distress. Give it a little more time. But time was a cruel mistress, stretching out into an endless expanse of unanswered questions. Every day without Caleb felt like a piece of himself had gone missing, leaving an empty, echoing space where laughter and quiet understanding used to be. The hope he'd dared to nurture, the feeling of being truly seen, had withered under the relentless sun of Caleb's absence. He couldn't shake the worry, the gnawing certainty that something was profoundly wrong, or worse, that he had somehow driven Caleb away for good. The apartment felt too big, the silence too loud, and the aching void in his heart grew deeper with each passing, silent moment. A distant encounter, the fluorescent lights of the supermarket hummed, casting a sterile glow on rows of vibrant produce. Leo, basket hooked over his arm, drifted through the aisles, mind miles away. Each day blurred into the next, a monotonous cycle of work, restless nights, and the crushing weight of unanswered questions. He picked up a bag of apples, their crisp ascent doing little to cut through the fog of his despair. It had been weeks since he'd heard from Caleb, weeks of silent calls, unread texts, and a gnawing emptiness that settled deep in his chest. He turned the corner into the frozen food section, intent on grabbing a pint of ice cream, a small comfort in his self-imposed exile. That's when he saw him. Caleb. He stood by the freezer door, contemplating a box of waffles, his dark hair a little longer, a faint shadow of stubble on his jaw. The sight hit Leo like a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. For a moment, the world tilted, the supermarket sounds fading into a distant drone. Caleb, the man who had woven himself so intricately into the fabric of Leo's life, was suddenly, impossibly, right there. Caleb looked up, his gaze sweeping across the aisle, and then he saw Leo. His hand, reaching for the waffles, froze. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. Surprise, yes, but also a flash of something akin to alarm. His eyes, usually so warm and direct, seemed to dart away, unable to hold Leo's searching stare. Caleb? Leo's voice was a shaky whisper, barely audible over the low hum of the freezers. Caleb cleared his throat, a small, nervous sound. Leo. Hey. His tone was flat, devoid of the familiar warmth, the easy cadence that had once soothed Leo's anxieties. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. He wanted to rush forward, to demand an explanation, to shake Caleb until the silence between them shattered. Instead, he gripped his basket tighter, the plastic handle digging into his palm. I've been trying to reach you. Caleb finally met his gaze, but it was fleeting, distant. His eyes were shadowed, a weariness etched around them that Leo hadn't seen before. Yeah, I've been really busy. He gestured vaguely with his free hand, as if to encompass a whirlwind of unseen activity. Busy. The word hung in the air, thin and inadequate. Leo felt a cold dread creep through him. Busy? Caleb, you just disappeared. I was worried sick. I thought something had happened. A muscle twitched in Caleb's jaw. He shifted his weight, his attention seeming to drift towards the frozen peas aisle behind Leo. No, I'm fine. Just things, work, family stuff. It's been a lot. He offered a weak, almost apologetic smile that didn't reach his eyes. The casual dismissal, the vague excuses, felt like a slap. This wasn't the Caleb who had stayed by his bedside after the fire, who had shown up with coffee and an easy smile, who had listened to Leo's anxieties about his future with such quiet intensity. This was a stranger, guarded and remote. A lot? Leo's voice was sharper now, edged with the pain that had been festering for weeks. You couldn't send a text? A single message? Caleb's shoulders stiffened. He picked up the box of waffles and placed it in his own basket, avoiding Leo's gaze. Look, Leo, I really gotta go. I've got a lot to do today. He took a step back, putting more distance between them. The supermarket lights suddenly felt too bright, the surrounding chatter too loud. Leo's vision blurred at the edges. Caleb, please, just tell me what's going on. Caleb shook his head, a quick, dismissive gesture. There's nothing going on. I need some space. We'll talk soon, okay? But his tone held no promise, no genuine intent. He was already turning, his back to Leo, pushing his cart towards the checkout lanes. Caleb, Leo called out, his voice cracking, but Caleb didn't stop. He walked away, a solitary figure disappearing behind a towering display of cereal boxes, leaving Leo standing amidst the rows of frozen food, the chill seeping into his very bones. The silence that followed was deafening, amplified by the dull ache in Leo's chest. The apples in his basket suddenly felt heavy, the vibrant colors mocking his inner turmoil. He was left with a hollow echo of Caleb's hurried departure, the flimsy excuses, and the crushing realization that the distance between them wasn't just physical. It was a chasm wider and deeper than he could have ever imagined. He dropped the apples back into their bin, the soft thud a mournful punctuation to the end of a very distant encounter. Lingering shadows. Weeks congealed into a month, each day a drawn-out sigh. Leo made valiant attempts to reclaim the rhythm of his pre-fire, pre-Caleb existence. He rejoined the gym, meticulously prepared proper meals, and even unearthed a dormant pottery project. The cool, yielding clay offered a fragile tether to the grounded reality he craved, its familiar, earthy scent a momentary balm. Yet even this sensory anchor couldn't fully banish Caleb's lingering phantom. Every distant siren's wail, every truculent backfire from a passing truck, sent a jolt through him, his heart vaulting with an irrational expectation. He'd pause mid-sculpt, glancing up, half anticipating a flash of red, a familiar, reassuring silhouette. The subsequent disappointment was a dull, constant ache. He tried to rationalize it, convincing himself Caleb was simply preoccupied, his life demanding, but the excuses felt hollow. The visits had ceased so abruptly, their shared silences and fleeting touches evaporating like morning mist. One crisp autumn afternoon, a memory ambushed him mid-grocery run. Reaching for the dark roast Caleb had once complimented, a vivid image sprung forth. Caleb sprawled on Leo's sofa, a steaming mug cradled in his hands, eyes crinkling at the corners as Leo recounted a mundane client anecdote. The warmth of the recollection was swiftly eclipsed by a cold, sharp pang of absence. The coffee bag thudded softly as it slipped from his grasp. He snatched it up, a flush creeping up his neck as he caught a woman's knowing smile. Mumbling an apology, he hurried away, a sudden taste of ashes bitter on his tongue. He found himself dissecting their last conversation, searching for an overlooked sign, a missed clue. Had he misspoken, been too eager, too transparent? Uncertainty gnawed at him, a relentless burrowing insect in his peace of mind. He'd even attempted a call once, his thumb hovering over Caleb's number for a full minute before cowardice claimed him, convinced he'd sound pathetic, desperate. He was Leo, after all, self-sufficient, emotionally guarded. He wasn't supposed to be this. Undone. The internal struggle was exhausting. One moment, a hot surge of indignation at Caleb's inexplicable vanishing act. The next, a profound wave of sadness would wash over him, leaving him hollowed out and utterly alone. He missed their quiet companionship, the comfortable pauses, the way Caleb's presence had imbued his small apartment with an unexpected sense of security. He missed the intensity and acceptance in Caleb's gaze. He knew he should move on, that fixating on a defunct connection was unhealthy. He'd even endured a disastrous forced date with a bland man from an app who droned about cryptocurrency. The entire evening was spent comparing him to Caleb, finding him wanting in every conceivable way. He left early, the experience solidifying his conviction that no one else measured up. The shadows of Caleb's absence lingered, long and unwieldy, stretching across every corner of Leo's life. A gaping chasm of unanswered questions persisted, an unfinished narrative. He resented the vulnerability Caleb had unearthed, the way he'd lowered his defenses only to have everything snatched away. He yearned to forget, to relegate Caleb's memory to the mind's deepest recesses. Yet a small, stubborn part of him clung to a fragile, foolish hope. He was weary of the ache, tired of the constant longing, but equally terrified of what truly letting go would entail. It would mean acknowledging that whatever they had shared was unequivocally over. And that felt like a loss he wasn't ready to confront. The confession in the rain. The rain had been a relentless companion for days, a silver sheet blurring the world outside Leo's window. He had found a strange comfort in its monotony, its constant patter, a dull counterpoint to the sharper ache in his chest. He was trying, truly trying, to stitch together the frayed edges of his life, to reclaim the quiet solitude he'd known before a certain firefighter had crashed through his ceiling and, subsequently, his carefully constructed emotional walls. He'd gone back to the old jazz records, the ones that hummed with a melancholy he could understand, and had even managed to finish a few pages of the historical fiction novel he'd abandoned weeks ago. But every quiet chord, every rustle of a page felt hollow, haunted by a laugh he hadn't heard, a touch he hadn't felt, for far too long. Then came the knock. It wasn't a tentative tap, nor a forceful pound, but something in between. Insistent, a little desperate, Leo froze, his hand hovering over the stop button on the record player. His heart, which had been performing a sluggish rhythm for weeks, suddenly hammered against his ribs. It couldn't be. He told himself it couldn't be. He'd tried calling, texting, even showing up at the firehouse once, only to be met with sympathetic glances and vague assurances that Caleb was taking some time. He walked to the door, each step heavy with a dread that warred with a terrifying hope. Through the peephole, a blurry outline, a shape too familiar, too impossible, solidified. He didn't hesitate. He pulled the door open. Caleb stood on his porch, silhouetted against the downpour, a phantom in the driving rain. His hair, usually neatly cropped, was plastered to his forehead, dripping onto a face that was pale and etched with something akin to exhaustion, yet alight with an urgent, almost frantic energy. Water streamed from his shoulders, soaking the faded denim jacket he wore. His eyes, those intense, ocean-deep eyes, met Leo's, wide and searching, a flicker of vulnerability in their depths. Neither of them spoke. The only sound was the drumming of the rain, a furious, cleansing roar that seemed to amplify the silence between them. The air was thick with unspoken questions, with the weight of weeks of absence, of hurt and longing. Leo just stared, his breath catching in his throat. He felt undone, a thread pulled from a tapestry, leaving him exposed and raw. Finally, Caleb shifted, his hand reaching out, not quite touching the doorframe, but close enough for Leo to feel the invisible current that still pulsed between them. Can I come in?" His voice was hoarse, barely audible over the storm. Leo nodded, stepping back, pulling the door wider. Caleb moved past him, his presence a sudden, overwhelming force in the small apartment. He didn't stop in the entryway, but walked further in, past the coat rack, past the low-slung bookshelf, until he was standing in the middle of the living room, water puddling around his worn boots. He turned slowly to face Leo, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. The silence returned, heavier this time, pregnant with a tension that hummed in the air. Caleb took a deep, shuddering breath, his chest rising and falling visibly. He ran a hand through his wet hair, pushing it back, revealing the full vulnerability of his expression. His gaze locked onto Leo's, unwavering, resolute. "Leo," he began, his voice still shaky but gaining strength with each word. I know this is out of nowhere. I know I've been gone. And I'm so sorry for that, more sorry than you can possibly imagine." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "I needed to figure things out. Everything. My head's been a mess. My whole damn life has felt like a mess since the fire." He took another breath, his eyes darting around the room for a fleeting moment before returning to Leo's face, holding him captive. "But I couldn't stay away. I tried. God, I tried. I told myself it was for the best, that I was confused, that I was just grateful or lonely or anything but this." His voice dropped, becoming a low, urgent murmur. "But it's not. It's never been anything else." A drop of water traced a path down Caleb's cheek, indistinguishable from a tear. His gaze bore into Leo's, raw and exposed. "Leo," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper now, thick with emotion. "I'm in love with you." The words hung in the air, suspended like fragile, glittering crystals, defying the storm outside, defying the weeks of agonizing silence. They were a confession, a prayer, a resolution. And in that moment, for Leo, the world outside, the rain, the past, all faded into insignificance. There was only Caleb, soaked and trembling, his heart laid bare, and the overwhelming, terrifying, beautiful truth of what he had just said.